Hello and welcome to another Game Explained discussion. I am your host, John Cartwright, and I'm joined by the beautiful Alex Seedhouse of Nintendo Insider. How are you doing, Alex?
I suddenly feel so attractive.
You are stunning today, Alex.
Thanks.
And I've heard a rumour that you actually went down to Bandai Namco to play The Witcher 3. And I know this is true because I also went down to Bandai Namco to play The Witcher 3 on Nintendo Switch.
I was about to say, I heard another rumour circulating that you've been down to Bandai Namco to play Witcher 3 as well.
It's the talk of the town. But we both have played The Witcher 3 on other consoles before. I think both of them PlayStation 4, right? Is that the same for you?
I played on both PlayStation 4 and Xbox One X.
Ooh, so you know everything there is to know about Geralt. Geralt of Trivia, we should call you.
I feel like that's a strong boast, but no, definitely not, I don't.
But regardless though, we played The Witcher 3 on Nintendo Switch in handheld mode, exclusively handheld mode, no docked, and we also interviewed one of the developers who worked on this port. So this is, I guess, quite exclusive information that we can relay to our viewers. But what were your initial impressions picking up The Witcher 3 on Nintendo Switch? What were your feelings when you held this thing in your hands?
The Witcher 2 and The Witcher 3, as far as I understand, both use CD Projekt Red's Red Engine 3. The last kind of port that I played was Witcher 2 on 360. And I think if you're looking at Switch, you're kind of thinking that maybe Xbox 360 is a bit more of a parity point than a PS4 and Xbox One. The Xbox 360 port of Witcher 2 is okay, but it's a bit, yeah.
It was impressive at the time, because like The Witcher 2 is one of the biggest PC games that was pushing the hardware, and to get that on 360 was a big deal, but I know what you're saying, it was a little bit rough.
And that's the kind of parallel that I think with The Witcher 3 when it was announced. I know it was kind of rumoured throughout the year, and it was like, surely not. But eventually, I think it was E3 in the Direct that they revealed that it was actually happening. And I was like, yeah, I guess my kind of comparison point was Witcher 2, and that's kind of where, before we started playing it, I thought that's where it would kind of sit. But it was actually, to start off on a positive note, much better than I was expecting. It's not kind of flawless, because we had a selection of save points to play from, didn't we? So we kind of had different experiences with it. But I chose to start right from the start of the game. I've never beaten The Witcher 3. I've kind of played it for a few hours and then got swallowed up in other things and never gone back to it, unfortunately. And I'm hoping that Switch is going to be this last-ditch attempt in my life to actually play it through from start to finish. But the opening was the kind of part that I knew, and obviously from playing it on both consoles was something that in my mind I could kind of compare it to, and it holds it really well.
The Witcher 2 is a good comparison as well, because that was pushing the hardware at the time, whereas there was a point where The Witcher 3 on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One was basically one of the best looking games of that year. So to have that now running on significantly less powerful hardware is very impressive. And we have had games that push the Switch before, like Doom and Wolfenstein 2, but I feel like The Witcher kind of holds its visual identity better than those two games did. Like, obviously there are significant visual downgrades, but it still looks like The Witcher 3. And it also runs like surprisingly well as well.
Yeah, I think everyone in our session was, whenever we got to Roach, was just like trying to pelt it across the open world to try and make the game buckle, and it just seemed to be able to cope with it without any kind of like catastrophic results. And that was one thing I brought up with the developer. I was like, well, how do you manage to, with the level streaming of like running across this map? You know, Breath of the Wild is a wonderful game, but there's not loads kind of from moment to moment when you're exploring the map. Whereas The Witcher has like loads of stuff crammed in, foliage and everything. But I think if somebody is really looking to play The Witcher 3, hasn't had the chance before, but finds Switch is the place where they sink the most timing, so they can do it on commutes and things, then I think they'll be happy with the result.
Sure. And when I was running across the fields on Roach, there is quite a lot of popping. Like, it's not flawless performance, but the frame rate does hold up pretty well. And that even goes for the more populated towns. I was in Novigrad, which is one of the first towns you visit. But there's NPCs everywhere, there's buildings everywhere, and just walking through that town or riding on Roach, the frame rate surprisingly just does its job. It did actually dip on PlayStation 4 if I recall, and both games are 30 FPS, so unlike Doom, which could cut its frame rate in half, The Witcher can't. Like, if it cuts its frame rate in half, it's running at 15 FPS. But yeah, it does run at 30 most of the time. Even if there are a few noticeable dips, it still manages to look really, really impressive. And I did ask the developer if the resolution is fixed or not, and it does use a dynamic resolution, but most of the time, it was pretty clear. And they have been transparent that in handheld mode it runs at 540p, and in docked it runs at 720p. So those numbers aren't fixed, but for the most part, I think it did hit that target resolution.
Because he said that like the target frame rate is 30, and so if there's ever kind of anything that's happening in the game, be that a lot of environmental assets or enemies or anything, it will lower the assets down to maintain the frame rate. It's just weird because it's one of these kind of games that you just think would never work on a Switch, but does. One of these kind of impossible Switch ports that you just think, there's going to be this massive performance disparity with the other platforms that a lot of people would just laugh it off. And we've seen that with some games that haven't quite pulled off, like Ark Survival Evolved.
Yeah.
That game, man. That just makes me sad, that game. But, like you said, we've had Doom, the Wolfenstein games. The thing with a first-person shooter is you're moving from room to room, and the way, obviously, the game works, it can kind of get rid of the assets it's loaded in the last room and forward think into what's coming up. Whereas obviously with The Witcher, because you're in that open world and it's less predictable what's going to happen in it, I'm just surprised at how good this is. I don't know if he said it to you, but I think he said they've been working on it for about a year. So it's not like it's been something that was in the works since before Switch came out or around Switch launch. It's something that they just kind of explored last year, and it's just panned out the way it has.
They were so low-key about this too. Like, I asked them how they possibly took a 70GB game and put it down to 32GB, and they were like, "Yeah, it just happened."
Yeah.
And an impressive thing as well is the sound design holds up really well. We were playing with headphones on, and when I was walking through Novigrad, the background music sounds great, the NPCs sound great. I couldn't really notice a distinct audio downgrade. And not only is it 32GB, but they're including all the DLC, and there won't be a day one download, which is just remarkable for a game of this scale.
One person said how impressed they were that the dialogue, all the voice actors, all those kind of sound files weren't hampered in any way. It sounded really clear. And the developer's really pleased that person brought that up, because they've worked really hard to make sure that that's not affected in any way. If you think, obviously, the scale of the game, as you said, the main game, the 2 DLC expansions, all on one cart, to get all that across on there without any real notable impact, I'm still wondering how it's even possible, to be honest. It's just weird. It's weird. It's magical.
It's strange. I don't know how they do this. And Doom kind of had the same thing as well, where Doom on PS4, I think, is 100GB when you have all those patches in.
Yeah.
So to get it down so low is insane. And also, this wasn't done just in-house. Saber Interactive helped with the porting process, which I don't think they've said until now.
I did not know that.
Oh, well, that came up in our Q&A. I guess you can use that in your preview article now. But yeah, Saber Interactive helped with the port, and this wasn't just done completely in-house, which is kind of impressive as well. Because I thought because CD Projekt Red were doing it on their own, they would put more time and effort into it, but it seems they have some help going on. So it's great to see that Saber Interactive are also getting experience for these high-scale Switch ports.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they're full on with Cyberpunk and Keanu Reeves. So someone snuck in a question about the new, because Cyberpunk uses their new Red Engine 4, I think it is, and someone snuck in a question about, have you been exploring whether Red Engine 4 works on on Switch? And I was like, and he was like, no. So I mean, I don't think we can expect, whatever's coming, any other games from them. I'd love to see Witcher 1 and 2 on Switch.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Seeing the benchmark that this is now set for what's possible on it. And equally, it's just a place I think that a lot of people are spending a lot of time and able to get through longer games by chipping away at them steadily, a couple of hours here and there.
I mean, The Witcher is one of those franchises that I never really expected to see on a Nintendo platform. So the fact that we've gotten to this point where Nintendo, they still have vastly underpowered hardware compared to the competition, but developers are making the effort to put their games on there, which is impressive. And I went to one of the most strenuous parts of the world in The Witcher 3, which was the bog. And the frame rate, it doesn't hold up that well. Like, it does still drop, but the fact that it drops on other consoles as well is like an expectation. So it's just really impressive how well it runs. And of course there are compromises around the world. I found that the lighting and shadows aren't quite as high quality, and some places just don't have shadows at all. But that should be an expectation for a game of this scale and this caliber. But yeah, nothing is really hindered. Like, you can still go at full speed on roads. You can still grab a boat and go sailing. Everything is really as it is, and even the text size I found was surprisingly readable on the small screen. which is something that a lot of other games like Fire Emblem Three Houses, for instance, don't always get completely right.
With the amount of obviously text, dialogue and everything in the game, I was worried about how playing it in handheld particularly, but they've really worked hard on the HUD to make sure it fits and that it's not too dominating on that smaller screen, but also that it's the right size that people don't, they're not squinting at the screen and trying to see what's happening. But certainly I think if people are in for this for the story, to experience the game that, for a console generation is, that everyone's been talking about and not had the chance to do it so far, I don't think that they would regret picking it up on Switch.
I think this is also a great graphical showcase too. Like, let's say you've just bought a Switch and you want the game that really shows it off. I think this is the one. I don't think there is a better looking portable game than this right now. There are clearer ones, like Breath of the Wild has a more consistent resolution, but The Witcher 3 is just so full of life. There is foliage everywhere. There's you can just sail through the world and see all this vegetation. There's no matter where you're looking, there's just something to see. Look off into the distance. There's some mountains. You can see distant towns. It's a beautiful game, and it still does hold up really well. And I think if you can clarify this with me, but I think the HUD elements are still native resolution. So things like your health and text boxes, I'm pretty sure they are 720p on the small screen.
I am not sure.
Oh, well, there you go. I will say one thing I did do, though. I went into the options, I turned motion off, as in motion blur. Because when I was moving the camera around, it made this really weird low-quality artifact effect. So whenever I turn the camera, you'll just see this horrible-looking blur. So that's one of the first things I did, was just disable motion blur. I'm not sure if you did the same.
I did not. Because I started from the beginning of the game, a lot of my kind of early time was cutscenes and the tutorials and all that kind of part before I got into the open world. But going to the tavern and doing all that, play Gwent and all that kind of thing. Even Gwent, they've made an effort to make sure that the cards and everything aren't too small on the screen. So a lot of that really impressed me in the fact that they've really thought about not just, oh, here is a game, bonk, it's on Switch now.
That's how development works.
But yeah, it's that easy. But they've really kind of thought about every aspect of what is within Witcher 3 and how best to translate that onto Switch. But there are some things I think that we brought up in Q&As, things that aren't there that I think people might have hoped for. One of my kind of disappointments was the lack of HD rumble. I didn't really feel general vibration whilst I was playing, and I don't know if it was turned off. I didn't go and check, but I just brought up in the Q&A and said, is there any plans to implement HD rumble? And he said no, and I was like, shed a tear and got a bit emotional for a little while.
Right, it feels like most of the Switch's unique features aren't being used, and I think they probably want platform parity, but there's some stuff that I'd really like in there. Like, gyro's not in the game, and I asked them if they'll consider including motion controls, and their response was basically, no. So there's a bow that you can use in this game, and when you're aiming it around, you have to use the sticks, which, I mean, I understand that you don't use the bow that often in The Witcher, but it's kind of a standard of the Switch to use gyro. Like, most of the big games do. So the fact that The Witcher isn't is kind of disappointing.
So you're saying that the next Nintendo Labo set is a sword and a shield? That would be great. Just two swords. That would be pretty cool. It's weird to kind of focus on the things that aren't there when you've got, such a massive game on a 32GB cart. HD rumble for me has been a differentiator for Switch. And in playing games like Akami and things like that, I just like that kind of, I'm going to call it a sensation.
I want to be in the bath and feel the bubbles as Geralt puts his feet up on the side. I want that.
That would be great. HD rumble that.
Also, this is one of those games that if you are playing it publicly in handheld mode, you might want to shield your Switch away, because there are some quite saucy themes in this game. Let's say like you're on a bus and there's a 70-year-old lady called Garen next to you. You don't want Garen to see your screen. She's gonna blush, and everyone on the bus is gonna blush.
Is that like Ganon's wife? Garen.
Oh no.
But yeah, all the content's in the game. One thing that I thought was really cool that I didn't know about the base game was that if say someone has played the Witcher 3 core game already, you can actually just boot up the DLC and you'll start with like a new save file that's leveled up to that point so you can play through that content. So, you know, if you are someone who has sunk a lot of time into The Witcher already but perhaps didn't get around to the expansion, you can just hop into that. You don't have to worry about sinking another, whatever it is, 100 odd hours into The Witcher 3 to beat it, to then play it. You can just jump straight into that. And I think that's the same on the other platforms, to be fair, so it's not like it's a Switch specific bonus.
Still cool though.
Yeah, I just think if there are people out there who have played it on another platform but now want to kind of spend time with it on Switch, you can just focus on that new content if you haven't tackled it. So.
And similarly, someone in my session asked if they would consider doing cross saves, so across different systems, and the response to that was, of course, no. So if you have played on PS4, then you're going to have to do it again. Like, there's no way to transfer your save from system to system.
Yeah.
But actually, on the topic of saves, actually, I kept hopping between different save files just to get a different feel for each part of the world. And the loading times are long. It takes a long time to boot this game up. I had to put it down. I was talking to someone as I was playing, and it was taking so long I just put the system down and finished my conversation with them until picking it back up again. I'd say it takes longer than a minute and a half to load up this game.
Do you find that it's the initial kind of loading, though, and then when you're actually playing the game, there's not that much that kind of slows it down? Generally,
yeah, I mean, the game barely it doesn't really load. If you die, it loads, but the world is seamless. The only points where it does load is when you go to a different continent. So when you go to a different town, there's no loading. It's just completely seamless. So yeah, it is a bit of a hurdle to get in there, but then you never really jump over that hurdle again unless you need to travel somewhere.
Yeah.
So it's an annoyance, but not like a game-breaking one.
Yeah, just kind of. I mean, Dragon Quest Builders 2 isn't on the same kind of graphical level as The Witcher 3, but that's kind of similar, isn't it? It's got a long initial loading screen, but then when you're in it and you're kind of warping about and traveling between different islands, you're kind of fine. I think in kind of my session with The Witcher 3, similarly, I had that long initial loading screen. I was like, oh dear. But then, as we've said, once it's loaded that initial screen, then once you're into the game, actually, it doesn't become problematic to the point that it's detrimental to the experience.
And it is worth noting, of course, as you said earlier, these are different builds, so maybe the final build might load a bit faster. But even if it doesn't, I don't think it's a big deal. Because, of course, there are other games that also take a long time to load on Switch, but especially ones like this, where you're basically in one big open world, it doesn't matter that much. But it is cool that we're at a point on the Switch where we do have these big PS4 games to play. Like, you can play Doom Eternal, you can play The Witcher 3, you can play Dragon Quest Builders 2, you can play Dragon Quest 11. It's just really cool to see this underpowered system really pushing above its weight. And The Witcher 3, I think, is the best showcase of that. As a game itself, I think the world building of The Witcher 3 and the characters and the story, they're all tremendous. The combat, though, I've never been a big fan of it. It always feels a little bit too flaily, kind of limited to. All you can really do is swing your sword and cast a few spells. And it works, it does the job, but I don't think it's as fluid as it could be.
No, I mean, I like using the spells because they each have a different purpose, and it's quick to flick the wheel open, choose which one you want, and then cast it and carry on fighting. But I do find the combat not as dynamic probably as I wish it could be. It's a bit kind of like, it's a bit repetitive. It's not like it.
Sure.
The actual battles can be quite impressive because when you're chasing like a large monster or something, you'd have to like run after it and all that kind of stuff, and actually track it. And there's loads of, as you say, great world building. When it actually comes to combat, though, it's a bit simple, I guess I'd say.
But yeah, I guess combat is only a small pillar of the overall game.
Yeah.
Like the open world is really the main character of The Witcher 3, and that aspect there is great. Though I will say, the controls for Roach are a little jarring now, coming off Breath of the Wild. Those horse controls in that game were just so fluid, whereas when you're controlling Roach in The Witcher 3, he's like a car.
Yeah.
Like, he steers instantly. There's no real feeling of actually being on a horse with him. And if you bump into a wall, he's still galloping at full speed.
Yeah. He's like a tank.
But it's one of those games where like the world is huge, though. I think the Breath of the Wild maybe had better use of all its space, whereas The Witcher 3 just has lots of space for traversal. So in that respect, they're two very different games. The Witcher 3 is more quest-orientated than Breath of the Wild is. So if you do want that another like big open-world game, this is a different take on that. And it's something that the Switch kind of lacks. Like, there isn't really a game of this caliber that you can play right now.
No, I mean, we're obviously kind of hitting an RPG period of Switch's life. You've got Dragon Quest XI coming up as well. But, you know, this kind of like story-rich games, I think, are something that I'm really enjoying on Switch. Because, you know, sinking that time into a game that has that much care into the world and all that stuff to explore and find is pretty incredible. In terms of Roach, the one thing I do like though is, you know, if you're traveling along a road, you can hold down, I think it was the A button, and then you just follow the road basically, don't you? So it's quite good at that point to kind of like try and look around and get those scenic views in.
Next month, not only can we play it on the Switch, but also the Switch Lite, which is this tiny little console. It's going to be running what was once a flagship PlayStation 4 game. It's just nuts how developers are squeezing so much out of this system. Yeah,
and we were told it was about 2.5 hours to 3 hours battery life on a standard Switch, so the one that people can buy since launch. So if you're looking at the battery upgrade that comes with either the new Switch 2.0 or the Switch Lite, you know, you're going to get a good chunk of time out of that game, you know, while you're traveling around. So without needing to hook up to a power socket. So that's pretty great. I mean, that's surprising because I was thinking we've got probably what is one of the most graphically intensive games on Switch now. Surely it's the battery life is going to be the thing that takes the hit because it's going to demand so much of it. But that actually holds up really well to me. Like, I was surprised their own experiences, that's what they've got so far. Obviously, we'll see how we find it when we play it.
But like, going off that benchmark, I'd imagine the new Switch would be like 5 to 6 hours, which is very impressive.
Yep.
Like, you can play The Witcher 3 on a flight and be fine for the majority of it, or maybe even the entirety of it if it's a European flight. But before we wrap up, Alex, is there anything else you want to say about The Witcher 3, or anything that came up in your Q&A that you think that you want to relay?
Seeing it in motion, I mean, I saw the screenshots that came out from E3, and they look fine, but seeing it actually in motion is the thing that impressed me the most. So the only thing I'd probably say to people who maybe... I worry that people will kind of judge it based on what they see online rather than actually experiencing it themselves in person. And I'm sure that as we go through the year now with events such as, I mean, it's playable at Gamescom, I think it's just one of those things I think that I wish people would just try and just, even if, you know, maybe they don't want to play it all the way through themselves, but just kind of, it's something I think to appreciate on Switch.
I was impressed when Skyrim came out on Switch, and that's a last-gen game. Yeah. So to have this current-gen game in the palm of your hands is just absolutely nuts.
And we still don't know when it's out.
Probably soon. I mean, it felt like it was finished.
I feel like it's probably going to come later in 2019 though, because with everything that is coming out, it's just carefully positioning it in the calendar where it's not going to get too overshadowed by other things, I think. But that's obviously down to them.
Alright, I'm really impressed by The Witcher 3 as well. I think this is one of the most impressive games you can see right now on Switch. So hopefully people who haven't played The Witcher 3 before do pick it up, because it is a very impressive port. And The Witcher 3 is a great game, even if I do have a few problems with the core gameplay. But anyway, Alex, where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter, CD87, or the website is Nintendo Ints, so that's on Twitter. Other than that, I'm usually tweeting gibberish. So
and by the time this goes up, I assume you're going to have a preview article on The Witcher 3 as well, right?
I will have my preview article up, and also the footage, which you will probably also have.
We of course had a Q&A session as well, so anything that Alex didn't mention in his discussion will probably be in his preview article, so there's going to be a link to that in the description below, and be sure to check it out. He does a great job putting words on a page.
Thanks.
Alright, thank you so much for watching, everyone, and of course be sure to subscribe to Game Explain and also ring that bell for a lot more on The Witcher 3 and other things gaming too. Until next time, bye.